The whole point of developer relations is to represent a company to the developers. The developers will learn in what ways that organization and its product trusted. And that's not to say that I don't use AI for content creation. I'm not going to ask an LLM to write a blog post for me and then post. What I will do is I will write the blog post and I'll ask it to go off and do some research of those to make sure that I'm on the right track. So if you think of the LLM as the brain of sorts, the harness is kind of like the body. So my brain can tell me I need to, but it doesn't have any arms. So when you write a harness, you're writing software, make calls to an LLM in some way. In that, it'll also give it information like you have access to these tools.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Everything Outside Code. If everything went well, we should be live. And I'm here with Ben. I've come across Ben a lot of times over the last couple of months, and it's amazing to have Ben on the podcast today. Hey Ben, how you doing?
Hey William, good to be here. I'm doing well. It was very odd bump into you at an event in person a couple of months ago after we'd spoken a few times on like Zoom or whatever.
Yeah,
so, it's nice to be on the show.
Yeah, I think it was bound to happen as developer advocates. You just run into each other, especially if you go to events. That just happens. Well, good to have you on. Today, we're going to be talking about GTM engineering. For anyone listening, I've seen like the job title. I've seen it in posts on LinkedIn, on Twitter. A lot of folks are moving away from just GTM. Actually, folks are moving from like sales engineering to like GTM engineering or marketing to GTM engineering. So we're going to be talking about that also from the lenses of developer advocacy and, educating and selling to developers. So we'll just jump right into it, Ben. When you hear GTM engineering, what do you think about? What comes to mind?
Okay, the flippant answer is there are so many different answers. As with DevRel, GTM engineering, I think we're all still trying to work out exactly what it means. To me, I think of it as using technology, either whether it's vibe coding or writing your own scripts or any kind of automations, using those in order to automate the not necessarily mundane, but the repeatable daily tasks do as part of any GTM operation.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you've done this previously at Auth0 with
GTM. So I wasn't within the context, DevRel, but that was yeah. So Auth0, I was there from like 2018 till 2022, 3. I think just the beginning of 2020. So just over 4 years. And the DevRel team itself started out when I first joined under marketing, and we moved to and then back to marketing, and then eventually we had our own division and became its a whole entire vertical reporting straight the CEO. But from a marketing perspective, obviously we didn't have AI in the same way nowadays at the time, but certainly like you could say the GTM engineering back in those days was having a really solid spread team share so you know exactly what's happening, but then using the functionality, the programming type of functionality within to automate things, lookups, and it was very routine. Yeah.
So what told you that you sort of needed to move from education? Because for me, I feel like we can solve a lot of things by just writing better copy and better content and explaining things better, or just making a demo video. At what point do you feel like, okay, I need to like move away from doing that to figure out how to do things a bit programmatically, bringing in the engineering to
I think the big thing to do is to analyze, like if you can keep a diary, even if it's in your head, of what you do day to day, the lowest hanging is always where you go first. So is there something you do that an example of that might be maybe your email to see if there are any emails from, if you're in an organization, and when I was at ZenCode, I was an enterprise developer. So I dealt a lot with e-sales stuff, almost like working with customers that were in the pipeline, as well as doing the data developer advocacy stuff. But I had automations that would emails from people asking for help getting or issues they were facing, or maybe they'd run out of free tokens from them and they needed a bit more for their trial. All of these kind of things are daily noise that enter your inbox, and then your soft brain, as I call it, because I've got a hardware brain now as well that's AI powered. But they're kind of the heavy weight that just hangs around and distracts you. It's the thing that you have to do, and all of these things can be either by responding directly to them with like generate responses they're very easy to tell what they are, that they are AI sometimes, and that can put. So I generally will get it to an email, and then I just send. Still saves me a ton of time. And sometimes you can get integrations like if somebody emails me asking for some extra tokens, I'll probably just automate an API call that's done. So there's some fully hands-off automations you can do, but a lot of them I find at the moment still, they're still hands-on.
Yeah, that's great. And when you get it going the first time, do you think about how it's going to be packaged and delivered? What's sort of like the minimum viable version of it? Did you have a system you followed? Did you have like maybe tools that you use to say like, you know what, I'm going to program this. This is a bash script. I'm just going to throw this bash script out. Peace.
Sure.
What did an MVP for it look like?
I love this question because if you'd asked any developer like 5 years ago if they were writing an automation or a script, there is a process you go, here's a language that I'm comfortable with, or here's one that makes sense because I'm talking to a REST-based API. Here's something I've built before so I can use that. Nowadays, when it comes to designing the automation, I don't actually care if it's a script or, I prefer something deterministic, so I'm not burning tokens every time. But sometimes it's just a Claude Code instance in a loop, and it checks every hour for new email. And then you can have skills that will react to those emails in different ways. So I might have a skill for managing, again, going token example, skills for my managing demo token requests and skills for managing other things. Sometimes it just into a markdown file that becomes my to-do list. But how that actually happens under the hood, I generally don't care about much other than the difference between, is it done deterministically? So is there a script that runs every time and doesn't burn tokens? Or does it happen non-deterministic via an LLM? And then the process that I use is I Claude to build that. I tell it the problem that I have. I tell it the kind of solution that I want. I'm moving away from being too prescriptive about solutions now to the days when I used to be a solutions architect, where it's more important to find the inputs, the outputs, the goals without making an implementation itself and letting the LLM tell you the best way of implementing it. Because especially if you're using the same LLM to do the work, they're very good at telling you. So I generally let it take over the design and planning phase, approve that plan, and then let it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's really interesting you say that because, in the early days of like AI as we know it today, which is post ChatGPT 2023, we wrote like there was an emerging field that died so quickly, prompt engineering. That was like, here's how you provide like your LLMs with like the right instructions. You need to have like a format. You need to structure things this way so that it can work better. But more recently, you don't even have to write good English. You just need to like just write stuff and it goes on and it figures it out. So I'm trying, what's your experience been like so far when you've just leaned into the vibe fully with using LLMs, knowing that models like Fable and Soul are like bonkers and they could literally figure out stuff that you haven't said?
Yeah. So, even when it comes to using Haiku and Sonnet, one of the things that I found is actually detrimental for me is I type so fast that I inevitably make typos. And I always have to go back and fix them up. But I'm not doing that when I'm talking to LLMs as much. If something comes through that maybe there's an autocorrect really changes the context, then I will. But if I like should and could and those kind of words, I always get the L and the D the wrong way around. One finger is faster than the other. I don't bother fixing those anymore because the LLMs work right. So from that perspective, there's a lot less that I'm being prescriptive. I'm being more vibe codery. But I had a chat with the guy behind the Ralph loop about 3 weeks ago, I think. And one of the things he was saying is that every time a new model comes out, we all have our Claude MDs, like the system level ones as well as the ones per, and they've got things in there like always way or I don't want this. But one of my common ones is like, don't use M dashes. I don't want M dashes. I don't want any character that I cannot type because it feels more human than when those are missing. But there are a whole lot of rules that we put into our Claude MDs or Agent MD files. And every new model that comes out, especially when it's a step model, it's like Opus to Fable, as opposed to just 4.85 when you're looking at Opus. The responses are training is slightly different and they've learned slightly different things. So what he often does, especially from a loop engineering, is he'll blow away the entire Claude MD or Agents MD file and kind of rebuild. There are efficiencies you can have, like you can get it to have a look at the old file for the kind of things that you want, and let it build it over time and use that more as more of a guideline. quote the movie, because the more information you give it nowadays, the more you're almost cornering. And I used to find, like you say, prompt engineering, right as much the specific spec-driven development is still a thing. I'm not going to, like, we can go into that if you like from a developer's perspective, but from a getting your gist across to an LLM, find the more specific you are, the more you corral it into a direction that it might not want to go in, and it might have a better idea. They're very smart at working out a good way from getting. So oftentimes I will pare back and I'll just make a very simple statement. I'd like some help planning a design around whatever it is I'm doing. Is the kind of way that I would start. And then you can kind of tease out conversationally where to go, which does mean that probably a year and a half now, especially when the spec-driven design and the Ralph loop and all of those kind of things and Gastown came out, we very much understand now there are two dominant ways that you can use an LLM. The first one is conversationally to build up a plan or a design of some sort. And the second one is the implementation, where you just give it a list of things to do and a simple instruction to churn through it, just set it and forget it. You let it go away and do its stuff. And in the latter case, it helps to have the specificity behind the design, but that's built by having that simpler conversation in that conversational style. I guess if you think about it from a software engineering perspective, it applies to any product design, system design of any sort, is you've got the double diamond. Like you have expensive planning, and then you break it down and you work out which ones work, and then you have expense and contract again. And it's a similar kind of thing. You like the conversations that I have, and predominantly with Fable or Opus. I'm a Claude Code guy. I use the other LLMs for the autonomous stuff. If I've got something building in the background, I go to OpenAI and Gemini and various others. But when it comes to that expensive thinking, I'll use Opus or Fable to have that expensive thinking, create the plan, and then I use some of the cheaper models to do the autonomous. Okay, let's now do the.
Do you manually flip the switch between models, or do you use a system that automatically does it for you?
So I'm actually, a lot of it is where to start. So when it comes to moving from that conversationally expensive to the portion where you're starting the implementation side of things, I'm using an orchestrator design. So this is something that, like I say, I used to work at ZenCode. So ZenFlow is an tool that allows you software development as well as non-software related. The loop, and I've written a couple of harnesses myself. They use the same kind of methodology, and a lot of the you see in the way that a lot of, what would you call them nowadays, senior AI engineers, people who have been using AI a lot and have built these tools and frameworks around them. What often happens is you have this orchestrator pattern where you have one overall model, and you choose something like maybe even Fable, but probably Opus, or an Opus level across the different providers. And you'd have one of those as an orchestrator, and it will then be able to deduce based on the task which subagents, if any. And generally, I have an orchestrator that never does any of the implementation, whether it's code or writing anything really, any aspect. I'll have a top level orchestrator that's probably Opus, and then will then choose, it always creates a subagent, but it'll choose which model to use. And that could be a vendor model. There was some interesting research done, I think it was about 6 weeks ago or so I read. And I was doing a similar kind of like, can I use something like Go or Sonnet to be the, and interestingly, it kind of plays into the same mental model that humans have, in that you don't know what you don't know. And using Sonnet as the orchestrator would never elevate to Opus for a more complicated task, because it didn't know that it didn't know how to do. Whereas Opus, if it notices, well, this is something I can do easily, but Sonnet can also do it, it will kind of downgrade the model, or it will start a subagent with a lower complexity LLM model than its own. So that's why a lot of these orchestration tools will start with a good inference thinking model, and then team or swarm or whatever you want to call them of agents using the right model for the right task. And then the second thing we found, we as a community, is that because each model, and especially each group of models within each organization, so all the Anthropic models have a similar kind of training. I mean, they're not, but they're a lot more similar than all of the AI models, which are a lot more similar than all of the Gemini models, for example. So they're all trained on different sets of different purposes, weightings, all of these kind of things. So there's a lot of value, especially with when you're looking for really high quality stuff, or you're looking at quality assurance. They kind of go hand in hand to really high quality, verify that the implementation is having multiple models from vendors. So maybe getting in a Sonnet and a 5.2 and a Gemini 3.1 Flash or something, and having all three of those verify the work that's been done, and then come back and consolidate that report into one, and then compare against each other. Much higher quality review than just using one model. If you're only going to use one model, use a model. And we're finding that doing this gives us perspective. I don't like my microphone. I don't like anthropomorphizing models, but they have these different perspectives. And having somebody else, it's like pair programming, right? Having somebody else look at your code is better than looking at it again. Same thing goes for models.
Yeah, that's cool. My first foray into like trying out different models was OpenClaw. I wonder if anyone still uses OpenClaw as like just like folks use it, but I don't see them a lot in the news as much as possible. But it was, OpenClaw with choosing like different models for stuff. So you talked about loop engineering, right? I still haven't tried out like the Ralph loop. I've seen it like everywhere. At some point I just got like so exhausted with so much stuff that was out there.
I know, right?
Could you tell me a bit more about it? Have you tried it? Do you use it in your workflow as a developer advocate? What does that look like?
So I first heard about loop engineering or Ralph loop probably about a year ago, I think it was. It first became popular at the beginning of this year, around about January. Posted a number of blog posts about it, and people started talking about it in the industry more. And it's become a lot more popular. But the general concept of the Ralph is that the best way to use an LLM is to use minimal context in terms of the context window size, because that's where the cost is. In order to do that, you take a large problem and you break it down into tasks. And if you think about it, that's how we've done software development for we don't just turn around to a software engineer and say, hey, write me Facebook. You've got to break it down into like areas, and there's the UI component, and then there's the functionality, and the functionality breaks down into sub-functionality. You've got specific ways of bases. And so you can break it down into really small, even down to things, email addresses should be a way, or we need a function for masking personally identifiable information. There's also different ways you can break it down into a really small component. So the theory with the Ralph loop, or loop engineering in general, is you spend time with a good model, find this, and then you use a similar model. It goes down slightly, but I would usually use Opus for finding this. And then I would use probably Opus or maybe Sonnet for taking the spec and turning it into an implementation plan. Is basically just a really long, and the loop then comes into effect in that you start. Claude Code was what people were using in the beginning, but any like harness that is command line based ideally and can be run in a non-interactive. So if you run Claude-P, it starts in headless mode and can like in a first prompt in, and it will then just go off and do whatever it does, and then it'll and the prompt in this case is the same every single time. It's basically open the implementation plan, find if there's any tasks that are currently in progress. And if they are, then it's probably because in which case there should be some notes against it about if so, pick that up. And then if there's nothing, find a task that isn't open, pick the one that is the best for you to get up right now, depending on what the state of the project is, implement that, find that you can't do it, get into any loop, or even if it does work, document the steps that you took and the outcome to the end of that, and don't feel like you failed. Run a whole lot of tests. So this is where the guardrails run a whole lot of tests. If those tests pass, commit it to, and then exit the loop. And that loop it's the same instruction every single time. So you have a number of, the first one is, it's a small amount it can get by the LLM as well. And it never, so the only thing that changes is the status of the implementation plan. And that implementation plan will mark up until everything's done, and then the loop ends. It never does it again. And what we find is that for some reason, this is a personal stat, I found that no matter what I set it out to do, it would take roughly 60 iterations to, whether it was like a full MVP of a product or a smaller project that I was working on. I was getting to like 60 iterations, and then they would finish saying, I'm done. You'd have to look at the implementation plan. You'd have between 60 and 120 commits, because sometimes fail. But because every time you start with a brand new content, it doesn't get poisoning, where the LLM gets confused by what's been said previously in the conversation and then it either applies information that's no longer valid, or it misconstrues information that now applies to the next step that it's going to take. So you're eliminating that context drift and context poisoning and just keeping it focused on one task. So that's basically all the Ralph loop was. And Jeffrey even said that he basically whittled it down to a bash, which is basically while true, run Claude. That's it.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. And is this what you currently use at the moment? When you said you built harnesses and you're still building harnesses, are you building these loops? And typically, when you say you build harnesses, what exactly does that look like? Where do you even start?
Great question.
Do you just open an editor and it's like, hey, I'm going to build a harness today. What does that look like?
I
or what
just
do you
say,
end with?
Hey, Claude, build me a harness. No.
Make no mistakes.
That's right. Make no mistakes. Do it now. Go. So essentially a harness, if you think of the LLM as the brain of sorts, the harness is kind of like the body. So my brain can tell me I need to, but it doesn't have any arms. So when you write a harness, you're writing software will make calls to an LLM in some way, but in that it'll also give it information like you have access to these tools. So if you think of Claude Code as a harness, some of the tools would be you have file access. So here's how you can write to a file. Here's how you can read a file, can grep all of these files, all of those kind of things are kind of built into the harness. But then on top of that, you've also got MCP tools. So every time the Claude Code, you type something into, then creates a content or context, it sends that to servers. It'll include in there, as well as whatever you've written and some system prompting. It'll also include a list of all the MCP services that are available for the LLM to request a call to. So it's like me telling you, hey, I've got an arm. You can tell me to lift it. You can then tell me to lift it, but it's still me. So the LLM might send a response back saying, hey, I noticed you've got the Context 7 MCP service installed, which will allow me to find out more about this third-party tool. I'd like to call that tool, and the LLM doesn't do that itself. It's Claude Code that then makes that request to 7, pulls that context back, and it'll then send it to the LLM saying, okay, here's the conversation so far. I wanted this. You had these tools available. You replied saying you want this, and here's because the context gets built up every time, right? So the harness is basically the software that wraps between either the human or some kind of outside forces and creates a mechanism by which an LLM more power than. So I've built a couple of those. The Ralph loop to start with was just a Ralph loop, but then on top of that, for me, it was basically a bash script. And then I started writing Claude wrote for me dirtily into the bash script the ability to pull from the GitHub command line. Claude Code can do that as well. But what I wanted to do was to intercept any of those, bring them down, and then cache them locally. So I had local access to those as well. So that's kind of where it first started, adding tooling on top of the loop. At the moment, just for my personal use, I've grown to the point where I basically built that into a local software development factory, I guess they're called nowadays.
Okay.
So the idea is that you can have this spec, and then I've got a local, just running on my laptop, a local running web application that I can go through, and I can put tickets in there. The loop will then pick up a ticket and implement it, and they'll take through the whole process of in progress, done, requires testing. I have different agents that will testing, and then they can comment on those, and they can send it back to implementation if something's not working. So essentially, each of these agents is acting like an actual human would in a software development agency. I come from agency world. I used to work for a couple of different advertising agencies way back when, 20 years ago. So I'm basically just taking the knowledge of how those companies work and wrapping software around it. And that in itself is also a harness, because it's basically providing tooling to the agents, communicate with each other, and to have the tools that each specific agent requires to get their job.
Yeah, that's great. And typically, how do you package this harness? Are they all just like bash scripts? Do they end up looking like Cloud Code, or do you then package them into like an interface, like a GUI? What does that look like?
So for the one that I've currently got running on my system, it's a web-based application in Next.js. At the moment, it looks very good. It's not very easy to use at all, but it's just for me. So I'm not productizing this. I'm not making it available to other people. So for me, it's a tool that I've used, and a lot of people ever.
Ever.
I mean, you can't. It's on a local Docker environment, so you couldn't even if you want.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know other people in the field who are also writing their own harnesses, and it's a similar kind of thing. One of the really interesting questions with agentic development is we're now at a point where there's a type of software probably will be really hard because it's very specific to the person using it and is developed just for that one person. And other people might have similar ideas and want similar things, but they'll want it to operate slightly. So rather than writing one big SaaS app that's really customizable to the way people want to use it, and that's the Atlassian way, right? If you look at Jira, the whole point of Jira was you can customize this to do whatever you want. We have no opinions about it. We're now at the completely opposite end of this, where I wanted a tool that would be able to pick up tickets and build them. And rather than linking Jira and Claude Code and this and that and the other together, I just told Claude to build me the tool. It didn't one-shot. I'm not surprised. It didn't one-shot it. It's still a work in progress. But we are at that point now where, especially in, I guess, 2 or 3 years' time, people will be able to turn around to their Home Assistant, which will be powered by their locally hosted LLM and Home Assistant, and everything's totally off-grid, and you don't even need an internet connection. You can still turn around and say, hey, I need an app just for the next 2 weeks to help me train for an upcoming marathon. And then the app doesn't have to be secure. It doesn't have to be robust. It doesn't have to be, it could have a Y2. We don't read because it's a short list for one person.
It just has to work.
Which is really interesting times. And I think we're getting to the point where that is going to be one of the types of software. There's going to be software that's written in a temporal kind of a way for one or a very small number of users, disappear. Or, if it doesn't work properly, just read. Doesn't matter. Then you've got the other side, which is going to be more community-based stuff. Anywhere where there's a community or a net, like LinkedIn, for example. I could probably vibe code a new LinkedIn, but I would never, because LinkedIn has dominance in the marketplace for professional social network. And then the third category of software is going to be anywhere where there's liability. So banks are probably not going to roll their own authentication because they can. Yeah. They'll want to be able to sue somebody if it goes wrong.
True. Yeah. That's cool. I'm curious, in what GTM workflows today do you apply your harness or the harnesses that you use at the moment? What exact workflows, if there are any?
So the other one, which I suppose you could call a harness of sorts. Claude Code is a harness. So I'm basically using Claude Code locally and MCP services or command line services to pull in context from various outside sources and then persisting them locally as mark. I think Andrei Karpathy mentioned a similar idea like the beginning of April or so. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of replies to his post saying that they were doing the same. So I've been doing this for probably about a year now, and it's built up. I call it my brain on my lap. I think that's what other people call it, kind of a natural name. But basically it pulls in all of my email, pulls in, like if I'm on a call and with buy-in from the other person, the call's being recorded, the transcript pulled into my brain as well. It's basically building graph of all of the knowledge I need to do things. And some of the things that I get out of it is that I've got my calendar, but then I've also got like a to-do list with deadlines. They don't show up on my calendar. If I used a to-do application that exposed things as iCal, then of course I could. But I find it much easier just to open my brain in the command line and say, hey, what do I need to get? And I'll do that at the start of every day. Some people run a loop at 8 a.m. every day. Their brain will email them a to-do list or send it to them via Discord or whatever. So you can customize this to work the way you want. So I'm using it mostly to ingest all the information to give me the best ability to do what I need to do as quickly as possible. To a certain extent, I can also automate some of that. When checking email, again, I gave an example of when I was a Zencoder, I would have it draft email responses to people, and then I verify that I'm happy to send it and just hit send. So in the morning, rather than spending half an hour, 45 minutes going through my emails, which to some listeners might be a very small amount of time, but I don't get that many. But it still brings it down to maybe 5 minutes every morning, which is a lot more manageable. I can do that while I'm having my coffee and still waiting. So yeah, that's most of what I'm doing when it comes to that. And it allows me to keep across all the GTM activities. I was reminded yesterday and this morning about this session with you. I have my deadlines in there about content that I'm creating, have strategic ideas. And I also have agents that go off and do research and find out what's happening in the ecosystem. And then it might come back and say, hey, did you know that this idea you've got is similar to that thing over there? Maybe there's a collaboration. So it's surfacing things that I wouldn't normally do. The other thing that I'm doing in terms of surfacing is one of the hardest things I find for developer relations, especially if you're in a small or a single person DevRel or a small DevRel team, is keeping across all the conversations that are relevant to your team across all the different places where the developers are. There's a saying in developer relations to where the developers are at, and that often means being across all the conversations that are happening on Discord and Twitter, and I still call it Twitter, and Blue Sky and Reddit. And one of the issues that I had with Reddit was that it's very hard, unless you actually dive in and you spend time on the Reddit website, to search for things. And then you've got to search quite specific, because their semantic searching is pretty good, but it's not all. Is being across conversations, surfacing those conversations that I should be part of. So I actually wrote a tool called Flow, which allows you to subscribe to a whole lot of different Reddit or subreddits, and then use RAG, basically, or semantic algorithmic searching across the conversations to surface conversations. So I might want to know when I'm big into security and privacy and stuff. So I might various different subreddits, and I'm interested in taking part in conversations around identity or authorization, login, all of these kind of things, rather than having to think of every single search. I just have a single search that says surface any conversations that talk about identity or authorization or related. And that then gets evaluated against all new posts that come through. I can email summary of things that I should probably be interested in, and I can go in and I can take. So that saves me hours every of searching for content, surfaces that for me, and I can go part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like you've built something I read somewhere. I can't remember where on Twitter, that was written as a company world model. Basically, it's like a GTM brain for your company. Usually some folks try to build it for themselves. And there's been tools like Obsidian, for instance, that sort of tries to build a graph of like stuff that you know. But with Obsidian, I think you have to like proactively send it stuff and put it on the graph. Whereas with LLMs today, you can build this, like, especially for teams, you can build this company brain where all the meetings are automatically recorded, information from channels, Slack, social mentions, all that is just like dumped into this data stored that forms a brain, and everything is graphed already. And your agent can act on all that information, and then it grows over time. When I think about this model, obviously a limitation that I think about is, scaling limitations, right? Do you get to a point where you're like, there's just so much information here? How do you like remove stale stuff, right? And just overwrite it with like new stuff. Like how we make memories. Like you go somewhere the first time, you have a memory of it. You go there the second time, you have a new memory that's sort of like a combination of both, but it's like one memory. You sort of like remove the old one in a way, right? Or when like something's updated, you've got like updated information about a fact. You don't keep both, you keep the latest. How do you sort of like maintain this in a harness? Because then within the context of growth, you're driving growth and you want to do this with up-to-date and factual information, or at least information that can help you.
I think that the easiest way from an implementation perspective, the way that I've been doing this, is using RAG to vectorize the key conversations or key topic areas of each aspect of my brain. And I have a cleanup agent that will go through once a week and will basically pull out in clusters related information to certain aspects. And what that allows the cleanup agent to do is to keep that context small, because if you said search through everything and find anything that's outdated, as you say, when the brain grows to what might turn to an unmanageable amount, you've got more than 1 million tokens representing all of your information. It's not possible to keep that in context and then keep the headroom for an response. Plus, it also gets expensive. So you break it down into logical components of the. You say check anything that's related to this area, and it can then bring their context in and sort it by date, because all of the context that I have is timestamp. Whether that's because a document was created, so it's all marked, but in Markdown you can have a YAML matter, which allows you to in, but some of them are also logs. So a single Markdown file with a log of it, but those will also have timestamps on them. And then rather than deleting or like deleting the memory, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm adding a weighting. So in that front matter, there will be a relevance rating. And in sorting and analyzing, because all data might still be valid, because there might not be any newer information about the same. Yeah. But if there is information that has changed over time, But I say, so this down here is still relevant to no. It's a decision we made but the relevance is like maybe, whereas the relevance of this one. So then in the future, when other agents are out looking for information, they can either ask for filter by information that has a relevancy of at least 6 or whatever. And that way you're kind of filtering all data to be what a current memory state would. I'm a big proponent of not deleting data you don't have to. There's PII involved or like regulation or like anything like that in a hosted environment. But for me locally, like just store as much data as you want. My hard drive's nowhere. When my hard drive gets full, then I'll start worrying about it.
Yeah. That's cool. And what's the sort of like the one convincing looking automation workflow that you wouldn't automate or that you wouldn't build, especially with DevRel and GTM? Yeah. It's like most convincing DevRel GTM automation, but you refuse to build it. What would
anything to do with outbound communication or any what would presumed to be personally. I will not automate the actual sending of emails. Redscope, the product that I mentioned that allows you to surface Reddit conversations. There is a tool in there to allow you to use an AI to do research on the topic. It's kind of inline and it takes all of the post and the comments and everything into account and can go off and research and come back and suggest a response, but it will never post to Reddit on your behalf. Not just because it's against Reddit's policies, but I don't think it's authentic. Developer relations is all about that's key of the role. And to the extent that I can automate the administrative side of things, it allows me to spend more time on it. I don't want to spend less time on the community. I want to spend more time with them. So if I can automate the things that take me away from the community, give me more time to actually interact, genuine, vulnerable, and authentic with them, that's where I would draw the line at.
Yeah, that's cool. And I see a lot of that like all the time. I mean, I get some outbound that's like, I think these days I'm already like peeled. I just don't want to see it. Like sometimes, even if it's helpful, I just feel like, no, I don't want to see this. But then I'm curious, when does this become noise? Because I've also spoken to folks that have gotten a lot of value from, say, code outreach and code outbound and mass outreach in the name of like just efficiency. Right. At what point to you did this just feel like noise? Did you receive a lot of it before you decided, I'm not just going to automate this, or this is just like personal beliefs?
The noise aspect and the AI slop and the mass out has, I mean, obviously not the AI slop because it wasn't around before LLMs became a dominant source of a lot of the content we read nowadays. But it's always felt a little bit icky to me. I've always been the DevRel that's in an internal meeting who will stand up for not being the salesperson on. Developers don't like being sold. And the whole point of developer relations is to represent a company to the developers. So the developers learn in what way is that organization and its product trusted and understood, but also to give developers often come up to us at events or online and say, hey, trying to work out this problem. This thing isn't quite working for me. I have the opportunity to either help them, or if they're right and there's a bug, I can take that directly. Like if you think for developer 14 is when it kind of really started growing as its own little RIA option. Imagine back in 2006, if you had a problem with Microsoft Word, so we're a unique opportunity for companies to real time from developers on the ground. So the last thing that an organization should want to do is alienate the relationships that exist. So from that perspective, I think things like mass mailouts, anything that feels like AI slop, it's disrespectful to the consumer of that, whether it's an email asking them to try a product or whether it's a blog post around a particular technical solution that your product solves. If you write it with authenticity and genuinely want to help the reader in some way, that connection is a lot stronger. Built with community is a lot stronger. The AI it's not created that problem. That problem's been around for. What it has done though is it's made it a lot easier for that to grow.
Yeah. That's great. I'm a firm believer in like authenticity. I mean, that's why that's our firm belief at HackMamba, and the work we do is like, we've just got to create the best possible content for developers. Yeah.
And that's not to say that I don't use AI for content creation, because it is a time saver. But again, it's on the things that aren't about the authentic. I'm not going to ask an LLM to write a blog post for me and then post. What I will do is I will write the blog post in gender kind of outline format, and I'll ask it to go off and do some research of those to make sure that hey, I'm on the right track and see if there's anything else that might be useful to add. So it becomes like in the same way as lawyers have paralegals, and the paralegal job role is looking like it might be replaced by AI. I feel like anybody who's writing content for any kind of consumer, but for us, it's for developers, right? So when you're writing content, you have an assistant who goes off and does some research. That doesn't, there's no risk being disingenuous, whatever the word is I'm looking for, in that respect. But when it comes to creating the narrative and telling the story, that's where that still has to be.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much, man. I'm just being mindful of the time here, but this has been fantastic.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, it's like, where did the time go? Where did time go? What's the best way for folks to find you and follow your work and see the stuff that you're currently building?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure I'm the only Ben Dechrai in the world. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter /X. I'm on Blue Sky. Most of those are open to DMs, so you can reach me any of those ways. And maybe on a stage near you soon.
Yeah, that's great. Well, if you're looking to learn how to build harnesses, you want to build yours, or you just want to think around loops, I think you already know who you guys now. Thank you so much, man, for coming on. That was great. Yeah. And that's today's episode of Everything Outside Code. And I'll see you all on the next one. Cheers.